Hello, and welcome everyone to a conversation with the UN Human Rights Council President, Ambassador Federico Villegas. My name is Gisu Nia, and I lead the Strategic Litigation Project at the Atlantic Council. The Strategic Litigation Project advises on the inclusion of legal tools as a part of foreign policy with a focus on prevention and accountability efforts for atrocity crimes, human rights violations, terrorism, and corruption offenses. Very glad to have everybody in our physical audience here today and also in our virtual audience. Just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. Our conversation today is public and on the record. I encourage you all to follow the Atlantic Council's Twitter page where you can tweet us your thoughts. This event will be recorded and available for viewing on the Atlantic Council website and our YouTube page. We will hear from our speakers, and then we will open the floor to questions from the audience. For those who are here in person, there will be an iPad that's circulated where you can put your questions in. If you are joining us by Zoom, there should be a Q&A or chat box located in the control panel to send in questions for the speakers. You can also tweet your question with the hashtag #ACStrategicLitigation. To deliver opening remarks, we have Ambassador Jorge Arguello. He is Ambassador of Argentina to the United States, and he is a lawyer and politician who assumed the position of Ambassador of Argentina to the US in February 2020. He has wide-ranging experience in the public sector. As a member of Congress, he was appointed chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee and chairman of the Parliamentary Observatory for the Malvinas Question. We are so glad to have him here today to deliver opening remarks. I'll turn it over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It is a great pleasure to be at the Atlantic Council to introduce today's conversation with my dear friend, Ambassador Federico Villegas Beltrán, President of the Human Rights Council and permanent representative of Argentina to the United Nations in Geneva. I am convinced that Federico's presence here in Washington is of the utmost importance to our country, not only because of his current responsibility to preside over the Human Rights Council, but above all, because his career represents a perfect synthesis of two of the main values that underpin Argentine foreign policy: a strong commitment to multilateralism and the international promotion and protection of human rights. Coming from a country whose citizens have experienced massive atrocities during our recent past, we learned about how powerful the multilateral system can be to denounce such violations. I am thinking about the historic visit of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to Argentina in 1979 during our last dictatorship. And on the other hand, once we got our democracy back in 1983, we were able to recreate ourselves as a society under a new social contract, one that established the promotion and protection of human rights as a permanent domestic and foreign state policy. In that regard, and in the same way, the values I cited before shaped our country's contemporary identity and the way it relates to the rest of the world. I believe strengthening multilateralism and enhancing the promotion and protection of human rights are essential tools with a view to dealing with so many crises we can see right now around our troubled world. And who better than Federico, who has devoted his career to human rights and is one of the most respected experts our foreign ministry has to enlighten us all about the daunting challenges, but also the opportunities that lay ahead the main multilateral body responsible for the promotion and protection of human rights around the globe, the Human Rights Council. I suggest we listen to him carefully. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now we're going to have a conversation. Ambassador Federico Villegas, I'm so thrilled that you're here with us because your work is incredibly important. And I know that on our team, what the UN Human Rights Council does has such a profound impact on so many aspects of our work. I'll give a little bit of a bio about you for our audience. The ambassador is a lawyer and career diplomat who entered the Foreign Service of Argentina in 1993. He's the current president of the UN Human Rights Council and permanent representative of Argentina to the UN in Geneva. He was previously the ambassador of Argentina in Mozambique, beginning in 2016, where he opened the Embassy of Argentina. In short, he has a long and very storied career, and we're very honored to have you. So to kick off, the Human Rights Council has been in the news a lot, the global news, in a way that we haven't seen for years, and that really followed Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine this past February. We saw that immediately in the aftermath, there were a number of emergency measures that the HRC took, including holding an emergency session in May, a special session to discuss the situation, and also the decision to establish a commission of inquiry on the situation in Ukraine in March. Could you talk to us a little bit about how those early months after that full-scale invasion played out within the Human Rights Council?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. A pleasure to be here with you and all the audience, and thank you, the ambassador, for the introductory remarks. Definitely, I knew, coming from Argentina, which human rights is part of our identity as a democracy, and being president of the Human Rights Council, I knew that the year ahead, 2022, will be challenging. But of course, never we expected that the world-shaping events that we are witnessing will have such a huge impact. What happened is that our session was supposed to start on February 28th with a high-level segment of over 100 dignitaries, including Minister Lavrov, that was to be in person on that week. And of course, 4 days after the invasion of Russia to Ukraine, the Security Council, as you know, was paralyzed by a veto and didn't take any action. And only 4 days after that, we decided at the Council that the first thing we should do before starting the business of the whole year was to have an urgent debate on the situation. And by an overwhelming majority, we took that unprecedented decision the first day of the session, on the 28th of February, before starting the agenda. And we had that debate, and we approved a commission of inquiry to investigate the violations of human rights and humanitarian law by a very overwhelming majority also. So these few early days of the war put us in a spot where the international community saw part of the multilateral system unable to react, and another part of the multilateral system on the other side of the Atlantic in Geneva being able to react immediately and be up to the responsibility, the collective responsibility we have. So that has been one of the big things that, of course, impregnated the presidency. And we had another special session on Mariupol, of course, in May, expanding that commission of inquiry. I have one of the most difficult tasks, I have to confess, at the beginning of the presidency was to appoint the commission of inquiry, because the resolution said that the president himself had to appoint the 3 members. And the thing is that the war was so blunt and so part of the international agenda that an independent mechanism is good when precisely you can prove that these people are there independently to assess the responsibilities for the violations and the situation. And it was quite hard to find very high-level people that hadn't spoken at that time about the conflict. And I spent, and in record time I appointed that commission, after several weeks of conversations with very high-level people that were very honest and say, I'm honored for the appointment, but I've already spoken in the press, in social media about this conflict. It will be, and I found this extraordinary, 3 experts, and I'm very happy that until now there's not a single complaint of those people not doing a very professional job. And the report in June, I invite you to read, is very strong and very important.
That leads to another question that I think is of interest to a lot of us. The Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine released a report on October 18th, finding evidence of war crimes, violations of human rights and international humanitarian law, and calling for accountability. There are a lot of different actors working towards accountability, and a lot of them are now in the global media, again, in a way that we haven't seen with some prior conflicts and crises. But there's the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, and also prosecutions in national courts under universal jurisdiction principles. How do you see the Human Rights Council's role in supporting these accountability efforts? And specifically, if there's any insight that you can share on that, do you think that the establishment of a Ukraine-specific investigative mechanism can help patch some gaps with respect to accountability? Or how do you see that role where accountability is concerned?
Yes, the important thing is to think that there are several efforts on accountability on the ground. But the Commission of Inquiry created by the main international body created by the international community for human rights is the one that is acting on behalf of the international community, appointed in a body like the HRC. What I think is that we should take advantage of such a commission in order to maximize the different efforts that are on the ground. Because as you say, we have national prosecutions in the ground, we have NGOs, very important NGOs, international, on the ground. We have the European Union, and we have the ICC. But the resolution created the Commission of the HRC already talks about the contribution of that commission to the accountability to identify responsibilities for the alleged violations of human rights and humanitarian law. So what I see, and I can share the insight. The insight is very simple. After I appointed them, I had a conversation on a weekly basis on how they will start working, and immediately they got in contact with other accountability mechanisms to try to maximize the effort of the international community. And we have to remember that the HRC mechanisms have a higher possibility of leverage when accountability comes to the picture, because we are creating independent mechanisms that do not have a domestic or a national agenda or an NGO agenda. They look at the facts, they talk to the victims, and we have to think about, we don't need double victimization of people in Ukraine. Because when you have so many accountability mechanisms addressing the same facts and the same victims, it's inhuman for victims to have to give their testimony 3, 4, 5 times to different mechanisms that they come to us. We also, that picture that it was stunning for the world of the first maternity that was bombed, remember, with that woman pregnant going out of the bombing. So let's be in the head and the life of that person that suffered that. Is it good to have 10 different prosecution accountability mechanisms knocking at the door of that mother to ask her as a witness what she experienced that day? It's not. So in human rights, you need to be very precise. And so this Commission of Inquiry is the only one that has the leverage by the multilateral system to be able to organize the accountability and the investigation of the facts to find responsibles. And for example, the different mechanisms, what I would like to see is the different mechanisms coming together with the Commission of Inquiry of the HRC to divide their work and divide of course, the testimonies, the interviews, the proof, to have a sound collective effort to find responsibles for that. And the report in October is very serious, very important, and you see the way they work in the ground. And of course, they went there several times.
The response of the Human Rights Council with the situation in Ukraine was very robust. I think a lot of us have taken notice of that and appreciate that. There are other country situations that might prove more challenging. Mm-hmm. One example is a recent vote concerning Xinjiang province in China. Mm-hmm. So despite clear findings from the UN Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights about possible crimes against humanity in Xinjiang, and reports from major human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch corroborating this, the HRC rejected a draft decision to hold a debate on the issue, just a debate on the issue earlier this month. In your view, are there any reforms to the Human Rights Council and its processes that you think could address an impasse like this, and which would prevent certain states, such as China, from avoiding scrutiny and accountability?
Well, definitely we have several factors and several elements that we can develop to overcome this impasse, as you say. First of all, we have to be consistent with what we decided. This is a universal system. By definition, a universal system has to address the human rights situation of every single country in the world. There's no country in the world that can be out of the scrutiny of the universal system. It will be incoherent and inconsistent. And if we are talking about China, which is a member of the Council, which gives you a higher responsibility as being a member of the Council, you're talking about 1/5 of humanity. It's 1.5 billion people. So by definition, first of all, there's no way that a system would not have a scrutiny on the violations of human rights of China or in any other country. Second, we need to build the confidence for the system to work. And this, the report of the Office of the High Commissioner on the situation in Xinjiang is a game changer in a way. Why? From the institutional point of view, the issue of Xinjiang has been in the Council addressed since 2017 in different formats. It was addressed by joint statements of states, by NGOs, by special rapporteurs. But of course, this report is not a report of the foreign ministry of one country. This is a report of the main institution created by the United Nations in 1993 to oversight the human rights of all over the world. So the argument of China, and this I'm not saying anything special, I'm publicly has discussed this with ambassadors on the record. The issue of that office didn't having no mandate from the Council to have an assessment is relative, because the competence of the office when it was created in 1993 says clearly in the resolution in Vienna to oversight and address human rights situation all over the world. So the report is there, and at one point countries might find a way to address this report. How? This is a multilateral democratic body, driven by states with majorities. Of course, I would love every resolution to be approved by consensus. We approve around 40 resolutions in each session, so this year we are around 120 important resolutions on human rights. Between 60 and 70% are approved by consensus, and that's always the ideal. It's a social contract of the whole Council. But sometimes we don't have consensus. And the same way that there was no consensus or enough votes to decide to have a specific issue in the program of next year to address this report, that by the dynamics and dialogue of the Council, even the new membership of the Council, that can perfectly change in the future or not. It will depend on the multilateral drive of the states. Because that same session was able to approve a special rapporteur on the human rights situation of the Russian Federation, for example. The same membership. In another situation, had another approach. But by definition, all countries have to fulfill their obligations. In the case of China, I don't see any way of the Human Rights Council not addressing the human rights situation of China at one point, because that's the task of the Council, and it addresses many countries around the world, and China will not be an exception. How and how far the human rights situation of China goes through this Xinjiang report, it will be with dialogue, cooperation, and the impasse could be addressed, engaging to prove that a report of the Office of the High Commissioner needs to be addressed by the Council at one moment. The way to get to that point, it will go back to the basis of multilateral dialogue and cooperation and constructive engagement with people that maybe don't think the same that we do, but that's part of being president of the Council, to administer the differences, but go always, in the Council we see every day the basic of any successful negotiation. To go from wishes to positions and arrive at the third stage, which is common interest. Each country, each of the 47 countries starts addressing a situation and can start with the stage of wishes. I wish that this could happen in this country. But that's not multilateral diplomacy. So we have to go to positions, try to convince others of our views. That's what happened in the negotiation of the resolution presented by the US, UK, and other countries. And if we don't convince the others of our arguments, the vote comes, and it's a democracy. We have to accept the result. But what we want to go is to the third stage, which is a common interest. So a system created by the international community to address human rights situation wants to assess and help the victims all over the world in every single country. And we have the Universal Periodic Review, which is an unprecedented tool created by the Council that never existed in the 50 years of the former Commission, which is a mechanism that every 3 or 4 years, every single country of the world has to put a human rights situation on the table and receive criticisms by NGOs, by other states, and follow recommendations. And of course, China is part of that cycle. Every single of the 193 countries, for the fourth time in this November, will start going through this cycle. So that is an indirect way also to assess the situation in Xinjiang and other parts of China, like any other country. And countries will have an opportunity to follow up on the report of the High Commission.
And I think that UPR process is coming up in 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. And
November 7th.
For those who aren't familiar, the Universal Periodic Review process does review the human rights record of every country. So that was, I think, a solve for the criticisms that sometimes these bodies are focusing on specific countries. I want to encourage the audience to submit questions. We will be getting to them in about 10 minutes. So I want to ask you about a developing situation. Mm-hmm. We have been seeing that in Iran, there have been nationwide protests that were triggered by the tragic killing of Mahsa Jina Amini, a 22-year-old Kurdish woman from Iran who was killed in the custody of Iran's so-called morality police. And this was for allegedly failing to properly cover her hair in compliance with the Islamic Republic of Iran's mandatory hijab laws. 2 days ago, we saw something unprecedented in the Iran context, in that 10 UN human rights experts, a group of special rapporteurs and a group of human rights working groups, got together and issued a statement saying that they believe that an independent, impartial, international investigative mechanism should be set up, a UN mechanism should be set up to look at the human rights situation in Iran, and that the crisis is at a level that deserves that kind of attention. I'm curious to know how you think the Human Rights Council can support this, move this forward, any kind of insights on where you think this will go, because I know that certainly from a civil society perspective, it's been a request that has been in place since November 2019, when in Iran there was a state security crackdown on nationwide protests at the time that led to hundreds and thousands of people being killed. And that went completely without accountability. And then a few months after, there was a COVID pandemic, and I think a lot of things slowed down after that period, and so, this request was no longer there. Just curious for your insights on how we can move that forward and how civil society organizations can be able to have a sort of impact on what the Human Rights Council is doing, and in this demand that really is coming from human rights defenders inside the country and what they want, even if the government isn't consenting, but the people who are inside the country want that.
Thank you. Well, first of all, we have to acknowledge that there wouldn't be a Human Rights Council without the NGO movement of human rights and without the human rights defenders of the world. Those were the drive creating the Office of the High Commissioner and also the Council. This Council has been addressing Iran with a specific mechanism, which is the Special Rapporteur on Iran. And this is since 2011, we have a resolution on Iran with the Special Rapporteur that has been renewed. And I met with him as soon as I became president, because precisely what you say, the situation in Iran has been acknowledged by objective information coming out of the system, and we needed to do something. And I engaged with the Special Rapporteur, and I engaged also with the Iranian ambassador to see if we could find a way for the Iranian government to acknowledge the worries of the Special Rapporteur. Of course, the Special Rapporteur looks at large on the situation of the Council, not on an accountability mechanism. What we are witnessing now, of course, I can share, it's obvious that there is boiling the debate in Geneva on a special session, a possible special session on Iran. There is rumors that the countries that would like to present that proposal to be soon will include in the draft resolution the creation of a commission of inquiry or investigative mechanism like the ones that NGOs and rapporteurs, and the Special Rapporteur yesterday himself asked for it. What I can tell is that I hope that we can help the people in Iran from the Council to find the way to address the natural evolution of every single society towards a full respect of human rights. That's what we try to do on a daily basis. We have all over the world regressions on women's rights and other human rights in all types of countries, global north and global south. That's a fact that you can see in the measures taken by different countries. But also we have natural evolution of societies even in the global south that have, from inside, decided to look at things in a different way. So obviously what we are watching from Iran is a society that is expressing itself as a society that they would like to see things in a different way. Like, for example, the action of law enforcement officers. So we will help from the Council for each society to find that path towards greater human rights. And if a commission of investigating the allegations and the violations helps a society to acknowledge that something needs to be changed, of course, that will be a success. But in that, whether we like it or not, we always have to find dialogue with the authorities in charge, because there's no way to change the life of people suffering in any country of the world only from the outside by creating a mechanism, because the ones in charge are the ones that can change the life of the ones suffering. So at one point or another, the ideal success of the Council is when you are able to create these mechanisms and then engage constructively with the country to accept that these mechanisms complement the efforts of the society and the state to make changes. And that's the way that we can contribute to the society. If we can have rapporteurs, those rapporteurs that you mentioned, those rapporteurs, every one of them address key situations of a society. You have the rapporteur on women's rights, you have the rapporteur on arbitrary detention, you have the rapporteur on extrajudicial executions. All those people, what they have is the expertise to go to Iran or any other country and help the society find a way to improve their human rights with their expertise. They shouldn't be looked upon, and I hope the Iranian authorities understand this, they shouldn't be looked upon as intrusive interference from other states or Western states in domestic affairs. The interference in domestic affairs with the international human rights law is something from the past. That doesn't exist. We decided 75 years ago already that this is not the case. It's part of the international law of human rights. So I hope that in the case of Iran, if the Council, again, decides by the majority to have a special mechanism for this situation, we can constructively engage, and I will, if I'm entitled to do that at the end, before the end of the year, I will personally commit myself to try to get a constructive engagement for the mechanism of the Council to help the Iranian people in this critical moment of rethinking their own social and institutional tissue. And this is not the first time that changes occur because of one case. We had in the case of Argentina, I can share the experience, we abolished the compulsory military service, and we changed the criminal justice code of the military after one case of a young 18-year-old soldier that was drafted for the military and was at the end killed during training, and with that opened a huge case in our country to debate whether we could have a military justice system separated from the common people, and we decided that we needed to change that system, and we abolished, in a country with a very strong history of military government, we abolished this. So this is the experience that the Council can have from the south, from the north, to help the Iranian people. I hope we can do that.
I'm sure that human rights defenders in the country would appreciate your strong leadership as president of the HRC on this issue. And I'll also note that I agree with you that the independent UN experts are just that, they are independent. And so I hope that the Iranian authorities would actually let the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Iran into the country, because the mandate holder has not been allowed into the country, and none of the other mandate holders that have issues relevant to Iran have been let into the country, except for, I think, the mandate that they supported. Measures. Indeed. But I agree with your statement. I have one last question before we turn over to questions from the audience, because we are getting a lot of great questions here. This is on climate change. So the Human Rights Council has both recognized the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, and has introduced a special rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights in the context of climate change. However, the UN also released a report this week which paints a very grim picture of the effects of countries failing to live up to their environmental commitments. And I'll note that the world's top two polluters are China and the United States. And so climate negotiations with them have been stalled for months. China was one of the only 4 abstainers on the recognition of the right to a clean environment, with India, Japan, and Russia. The US did not vote yet, as it was not yet a member. So we're not going to give them a pass there. How has this affected China and the US's engagement with the issue as members of the HRC And more broadly, how does this affect the HRC's goals on this issue when these two huge countries that have a lot of power at the Council are in the position that they're in?
Well, first of all, I will start with the last. I think there's no space for China and the US not to engage in the discussions on the impact of climate change in human rights, because it's already a revealed truth that we see on a daily basis. So there's no margin for any country not to engage. Why we did what we did and what we can do? We have to look in historical perspective. You know, the Council, one of the most important roles that is not a headline in the news, is we are the hub of the progressive development of new norms and standards. The future generations will have their rights better and more protected because of what we do on a daily basis, creating new standards of human rights. And of course, after 20 years of discussions on environmental issues from a social economical point of view or environmental scientific point of view, we decided last year, as you mentioned, that the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is a human right. And then the General Assembly approved the same at a larger level. I appointed the special rapporteur on the impact of climate change, an excellent rapporteur, Ian Fry, and I can tell you that I find that everything is to be grown. This is the tip of the iceberg, according to my view, of what we are witnessing on the impact of environment and human rights. It's a game changer of addressing the role of the private sector, for example. We cannot talk about environment, climate change without engaging constructively with the private sector. The private sector will need to have an ownership of this concept of the impact of climate change and human rights. And we are addressing business and human rights all over the Council. So we have to put our act together and join efforts facing this new social contract. And China and the US and India and Japan and Russia, at one point or another, they will come to terms to this new social contract. The same way that we saw with the pandemic and the impacts of the pandemic and leaving no one behind with the access to vaccines. I participated in Geneva also in the discussions on intellectual property for expanding the access to vaccines. These are game changers. These are world champion events that are changing our world. So the things that are obvious, if you put human rights perspective, how to address these changes, climate change, environment, a war, you will always be right. Because human rights is always the main pillar to overcome this, leaving no one behind and helping the most vulnerable mitigate the impacts that we have. We just approved a tremendous resolution, a new one, on the legacy of nuclear testing in the Pacific, for example. That's a new issue approved in the last session. For the first time, the Council is addressing the right to health of three generations already after nuclear testings in the 70s, 80s, and it's a human rights issue. We have approved a resolution on autonomous weapons and human rights and the impact on human rights on the development of autonomous weapon systems. So we are the hub of the progressive development of new norms for future generations. I don't see China and the US out of that discussion.
We're getting some great questions from the audience, so I'm going to turn over to that. One is, how can the Human Rights Council strengthen its role in issues related to Latin America? The human rights situation in Nicaragua and Venezuela remain critical, despite the renewal of the fact-finding mission on Venezuela and the resolutions on Nicaragua, like the one establishing a group of experts. What else can be done?
Okay. Well, first of all, Latin America is a country that has a long history of contribution to the universal system of human rights. If you look at the level of commitment with the universal system of ratification of treaties, of human rights standards, is very strong. And if you look at the discussions in the Council, you find the region contributing to the advancements of human rights. The region was the leader in the resolution in June on women's rights, and the region was the leader in the resolution to renew the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on Sexual Orientation, for example. So those are two examples of advancement led by Latin America. Within Latin America, we have some countries that are in the attention of the Council. by this same token of multilateral democratic body by a group of countries proposing to address the situation of another country. And this has been consistent. Nicaragua is one of those countries, has had resolutions that have been approved in the last years 3 times. And the last one asked for a group of experts, and I appointed that group of experts. Of course, like the case of Iran, we need those mechanisms to be able to contribute to the efforts of the Nicaraguan people to change and address the challenges they feel. And for that, I think that the best way is to continue the effort to make that group be able to engage with the government. And in the case of Venezuela, we did exactly the same. The fact-finding mission has been approved. I've been engaging with the Nicaraguan authorities and the group of experts, and I've been engaging with the fact-finding mission that I know personally, the 3 of the experts there, which are extraordinary experts, very respected, and engaging also with the Venezuelan authorities, which is a member of the council until the end of the year. So the situation of the region is being addressed. Other countries also are part of the attention of the council, but with other means. With the report of the Office of the High Commissioner, you will find an assessment of many countries of the region. And on joint statements by NGOs and other countries, you will have many statements on other countries. But the mechanism created to address a specific human rights situation on Nicaragua, on Venezuela, they are there, they're strong, they're part of the council. We have to respect. And until the last day of my presidency, I will insist that the issue that you voted against, the creation of a mechanism in a council, is not an excuse not to cooperate with that mechanism. It's legitimate to have a different opinion while you have the negotiation of the creation of the mechanism. That's diplomacy. What I was talking before. Express my position, convince we don't. Once that is decided, it's part of the council. It's a mechanism, has to be respected, and you have to cooperate even if you don't like it. So I hope that all countries cooperate with the mechanisms of the council, and we can find a way to engage with Nicaragua and Venezuela to find and see that these mechanisms complement the efforts. In the case of Venezuela, even they have an office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights in the country with 16 people addressing a lot of challenges of human rights. So what better than to have another mechanism of the council complementing the efforts on a specific task of investigation of alleged violations of human rights. And so I hope that we can find a way to complement these different mechanisms. In the case of Nicaragua, it's different because we do not have a visit of the Office of the High Commissioner. We do not have an office there working. And of course, the group of experts haven't been tried. In the case of Nicaragua, I have to say, I had a specific case of reprisals that I was very worried, and I decided to personally involve, which is a UN expert on indigenous peoples that traveled to Geneva to go to a meeting as a UN expert, was not able to go back to Nicaragua, and we had to engage and be able to have her children that were in Managua to reunite with the mother in Switzerland, and unfortunately she hasn't been able to go back to Managua. And that you know, since the Cold War, that we didn't have this type of cases of a person coming as a UN expert to a UN meeting in Geneva and not being able to board a plane and go back to their country. So the situation of Nicaragua, of Venezuela, and of other countries will always be part of the attention. And in our region, of course, there are countries of our region. So the Latin American countries, the Americas at large, will always be worried for the people in our neighborhood. The same way that Europe is worried for what's happening in Europe, and the African countries on Ethiopia, and the Asian countries on Myanmar. And all of those cases are part of the agenda of the Council. That's why we became, with this presence in social media that you mentioned at the beginning of the interview.
Yeah, I don't know if we mentioned for the audience how the social media is doing actually, but you might want to tell everybody how it.
Well, no, the thing is that the council became last week, well, actually this year, but the numbers are from last week. We became the intergovernmental body of the whole UN system with the highest presence in social media and followers. Higher than, well, the list is there, it's numbers. I don't want to, talk about it, but it's higher than the, more followers than the International Criminal Court, the European Court of Human Rights, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and the General Assembly and other bodies. Why do we have that? And I think that people identify to what we do because it touches them directly or indirectly in a way. Social media has some negative parts, but has a huge advantage. Empowers people to be able to have empathy for the suffering of other peoples that they don't know, but they have empathy for the suffering of somebody living on the other side of the world that have no idea and no personal interest. So that's a powerful message. And for some reason, we have people on the bus, on the train, all over the world, that they follow us to see exactly what we are doing in this interview, what's going on with the serious violations of human rights all over the world. And they found part of the multilateral system paralyzed, and they have one of the subsidiary organs of the General Assembly, which is 153 subsidiary organs, has the General Assembly. We are one of the 153, but we are one of the 3 pillars of the UN with peace and security, development, and human rights, and only 4% of the UN budget. So I would say we are little but powerful, and institutionally maybe we are not as strong as so other bodies, but people for some reason feel that what we do is important.
I would encourage everybody to send in questions if you have it. We'll still get to a few more questions. This is one. It says, although unrecognized, the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, the Taliban, is carrying out record human rights violations, especially on women and ethnic minorities. How can the Human Rights Council address this critical situation, which is really not getting the attention that it deserves?
Very important question. If I have to look up this year of the presidency, Afghanistan has been one of the countries that we took a special attention for obvious reasons. But let me tell you what happened this year. We appointed a special rapporteur on Afghanistan, and he was able to go 3 times and speak to the Taliban. And the High Commissioner also went to Afghanistan. In the case of Afghanistan, the Council did something that has not been done previously, which is joining consensus on a red line, which is the situation of girls and women, especially the issue of education came to the discussion a lot. I received personally Afghan women in the Council 3 times. You can see in the Twitter also the meeting we had. Very brave women, and brave women that even spoke virtually from Kabul. And I was personally very nervous for having, brave women talking from there. So what people are saying is we have to continue this constructive engagement to show that the international community cannot have a country where girls cannot go to school. Afghanistan today is the only country in the world that there is a prohibition for girls to go to school. So I think that we will continue, but we have a problem. The problem is that, and you know more than anybody, the news, we don't make the news. The news decide what is important, what is not. Unfortunately, many other important crises, like the war in Europe, move the attention of the international community, the press, the media, to other issues. And we were able in the Council to keep the flame of the importance of helping the people of Afghanistan. And I think that we will continue doing so, and I will personally engage in doing so.
There is a lot of questions on a specific issue, and so I will collate them, and that'll be, I think, one of the last questions we get to, which is about the fact that the protesters in Iran and the human rights defenders in Iran are not necessarily calling for reform. They are making their demands really clear about the fact that they don't think their government is legitimate. And so something that you said earlier, a few people have seized on, saying, you know, what does constructive engagement with a government like that look like? And how would that government actually be helping its people when the people are saying that they do not want the state that currently is in power? And I know that the UN is a state-based system, so this is the tension and the challenge. But I think the spirit of these almost 10 questions is how does the Human Rights Council amplify or support those in the country that are looking for a change with their human rights situation, especially when the state that you or the body would be engaging with doesn't let rapporteurs into the country, isn't necessarily interested in constructive engagement? You know, what is a way to support? I think that's what's being asked in these many questions that we've received on this.
Thank you very much. It's a very important question. Iran is a very important country. It's a sophisticated millenary culture, and it has the attention of the world. So it's fine to have a lot of questions about Iran. No problem about that. First of all, the Council fosters a space for dialogue and debate for societies to decide their path in improving human rights. But that means that we do not have a recipe. Each society has its own social and institutional tissue that makes them evolve. So I think that the constructive engagement, I'm sure you know, but constructive engagement is a concept that you have many people in Washington that can tell you a lot about how to implement constructive engagement, because they were the inventors of the concept in the 80s, like Ambassador Chester Crocker, for example, that I recently had a very interesting conversation on this. Constructive engagement means even if you don't like, even if you know that a country might not make a change, but you have society demanding a debate, you have an engagement to foster that debate. So I think that the Council can help Iranian society to find a path of evolution if they feel that they need that debate. If that includes certain changes, it will depend on each country. We cannot, from the outside, decide how countries change their way to organize politically, socially, and economically. That was precisely what happened in the Cold War. We had decades where one side said to the other how you should organize politically, socially, and economically. So that is from the past. Now we have to respect the rhythm, the learnings of each society, and the Iranian society, for what we are witnessing, will be continuing this type of debate. Whether this happens one thing or another, when societies evolve, all of our societies evolved. We have new social contracts all the time. Argentina had one big social contract, never to have an interruption of the rule of law or a military government after decades of military coup. And then we had another social contract to be accountable, to make accountable those responsible for crimes against humanity. And we eradicated the impunity on all responsibles for those crimes. So those are social contracts of evolution. We are about to have 40 years of democracy. The Council also has those social contracts of evolution. And with LGBT rights, sexual orientation was not part of any UN resolution 20 years ago. In not a single UN document. Now we have independent expert on sexual orientation that has been renewed 3 times and has chaired the issue in the Council, and we have around 20 countries only in 2022 that changed their legislations on same-sex relations. In Cuba recently, a referendum on same-sex marriage with adoption of children. So what shows you what has changed in India with the evolution of the jurisprudence of the Supreme Court of India, changing the concept of family, including single parents and same-sex partners. What we have seen in Singapore, eradicating the law criminalizing same-sex relations. We have seen 4 countries of Africa abolishing the death penalty. All those countries are societies like the Iranian society, that they decide themselves at one point to look at things in another way. And so I hope that we can help from Geneva, the Iranian authorities and the Iranian people to find their path of deciding a new social contract, if that is the case.
Ambassador, we are going to have to close. If you have 30 seconds of something that you want to leave the audience with, I'm going to give you that time, and I just really want to thank you for coming here and speaking with us about these critical issues.
Thank you, and the 30 seconds is to just go to the Twitter account and become a follower of the Council, because it will affect your life sooner or later, what we do in the Council. So I hope that we have an engagement, a very constructive engagement with everybody all over the world on what we do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador.